Today, the term Hermeticism is typically linked with an ancient Greco-Egyptian cult dedicated to the figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, thrice-born, a syncretic combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. Here I am making use of the term Hermetic in direct link to the practice of alchemy, not only in a physical sense, but a spiritual one, and specifically in relation to the practice of self-healing from physical, emotional, and spiritual ills. In modern allopathic medicine, the parts are isolated from the whole, resulting in a reductionist approach to health. As is evident in the ever-widening phenomenon of dis-ease, this approach seldom, if ever, works effectively. The idea that healing essentially comes from within ourselves and may be aided by certain substances or practices is an ancient one found in many different cultures. The ancient Hermeticists believed in a prisa theologia, referring to the idea that there is a single creator, absolute or God, that permeates this universe and beyond as the underlying spiritual current that is present within all religions throughout time and space. Gnostics referred to this divine presence as the pleroma, which in ancient Greek translates to the fullness, referring to the totality of the divine. This is the spirit that animates our being and consciousness, enabling us to experience what have been called miracles in our bodies and our lives. The Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, describes the interplay of the heavens and earthly life, the macrocosm versus the microcosm. The use of astrology was traditionally tied in with the practice of Hermetic alchemy and also included theurgy, a type of magic that entailed communication with deities. In alchemy, the metals are linked with planets and the elements linked with signs. We owe much to our current understanding of astrological correspondences and applications to the ancient alchemists. Astrology became such an integral part of medicine in the classical period that Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine in the 5th century BCE, is quoted with having said, "A physician without a knowledge of astrology has no right to call himself a physician." One of the most important symbols that has been attributed to Hermetic traditions is the caduceus, featuring a snake or two snakes coiled around a winged staff. This symbol has been utilized by today's medical establishment, although the meaning behind it has been forgotten. As the herbalist Matthew Wood points out in his book Vitalism, the caduceus made its way from the hand of the Egyptian god of knowledge known as Thoth to the Greek god of Hermes and his Roman counterpart Mercury to the Greek god of healing Asclepius. There are also depictions to be found of the Greek messenger Iris of the rainbows carrying a caduceus. As Matthew Wood further points out in his book, the magical staff entwined with a serpent resembles the tree of life, which stands at the center of the Garden of Eden. In other sources, we have seen the staff as a representation of the spinal column, with the coiled serpent a symbol of rising energy from the base of the tree of life, referred to in Sanskrit as Kundalini, as well as the symbol of a DNA double helix. Another symbol that was sacred to the alchemists was the Ouroboros, a serpent or dragon biting its own tail, representing matter being in a perpetual cycle of destruction and creation. The alchemical symbols for the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water are the most accessible to modern practitioners of medicine because these are the substances with which we are all familiar and make use of on a daily basis. The philosopher's stone is perhaps the most revered symbol of all, which is an alchemical substance capable of turning base metals such as mercury into gold through a process known as the magnum opus, or the great work. Although many have interpreted this process as primarily physical, others have viewed it as symbolic of a spiritual journey involving transmutation of the soul. It would not be inaccurate to consider both physical and spiritual manifestations as equally relevant to the symbol of the stone. 7 key stages of transformation lead to its creation and our ultimate enlightenment by way of the prima materia. These 7 stages consist of the following. Stage 1 is calcination. burning a substance over a flame until it turns to ash, a process that loosens the ego's attachment to worldly gains. Stage 2 is dissolution, involving ashes dissolved into water, which is a symbol for the unconscious and reveals the material that was hidden within it. This process entails freeing ourselves from the traumatic imprints held within the unconscious mind. Stage 3 is separation, in which the pure essence is distilled from the rest of the mixture, also entailing a separation from negative emotions. Stage 4 is the conjunction, entailing the formation of a new substance. After stripping away what is no longer useful to us, we discover what is left that is valuable and essential. Stage 5 is fermentation, also known as putrefaction, describing the breakdown of a substance with bacteria. This symbolizes the decay of the old self so that the divine child may be reborn within. Stage 6 is distillation, boiling and condensing a solution to achieve purification. At this stage, the ego no longer rules our actions but is brought under the dominion of the newly harmonized aspects of the self. Stage 7 is coagulation, the final chemical transformation into a solid state. The self attains wholeness in body, mind, and spirit in an elevated state of consciousness, symbolized as the philosopher's stone. By coming to understand the meaning of these symbols, we better understand our true spiritual inheritance and the abilities that over centuries we have been conditioned to ignore until they have literally shut down. Many of us have given our power away to gross material constructs that have caused us to abandon our intuition. Gimmicky so-called cures that only mask rather than treat the underlying causes of our discomforts. In the worst-case scenario, the cure given is worse than the disease itself, leading to an entirely new host of ailments. The attempt to bandage old wounds with quick fixes is to cancel out the most crucial element in the healing process, which lies within our consciousness. In the book Hermetic Alchemy, Paul Foster Case states that alchemy is really a Western variation of what Hindus call yoga. He compares yogic teachings with the doctrines of alchemy in a list that begins with the 3 yogic modes of existence and alchemical principles. These are sattva next to Mercury, both essentially meaning wisdom, rajas next to sulfur, both meaning the desire force, and tamas next to salt, both meaning inertia. In summarizing his comparisons, he states that, and I quote, "The basis of alchemy is the doctrine that man is the direct expression of the perfectly free, unmodified spiritual essence of all things. The alchemical work is the direction of the energy derived from that essence according to the perceptions of awakened intelligence." He further states, "For by the recognition of the principles upon which the body is built and its environment brought into form, the intelligence of man is able to invent and carry into execution novel applications of those principles. Thus, it is possible to bring about a finer adjustment and a finer organization of the human body itself." The correspondences of these same 3 substances, according to the Swiss physician and alchemist Paracelsus of the 16th century, were that of Mercury as a representation of spirit, sulfur as the mortal soul, and salt as the body. A constant sensory bombardment through flashing images, sounds, titillating flavors, and frequencies we are not even aware of have disrupted the body's natural capacity for self-healing, while simultaneously captivating the subconscious mind with gripping desires and phobias in a widespread cacophony which takes on a parasitic life of its own. In his book Mysterium Conjunctionis, Carl Jung suggested that the collective unconscious encompassed both human psychology and the universe itself. He suggested that the method for unshackling ourselves from its monstrous influence was to grow in self-knowledge and reflection. He stated that, and I quote, Expressed in the language of Hermetic philosophy, the ego's personality coming to terms with its own background, the shadow, corresponds to the union of the spirit and soul in the unio mentalis, which is the first stage of the conjunctio. What I call coming to terms with the unconscious, the alchemists called meditation. The act of meditation is not unique to Eastern cultures, as we in today's Western society have been led to believe. Meditation, cogitation, and giving pause in routine activities to ruminate, reflect, and ponder the deeper meaning of our actions and experiences was an integral part of Hellenistic and Stoic philosophy. In his compilation called Meditations, Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And along similar lines, he also said, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." As we are now well aware of, the quality of our thoughts also bears a significant influence over our bodily functions and health as a whole, regardless of its limitations. When we add thoughts together with outside sensory stimulation via the presence of images, objects, scents, and other phenomena that each release their own particular vibratory nature, impressing themselves into our energy fields, we at some point come to ask ourselves, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The thoughts or the things that were produced by them? Things or the thoughts that they triggered? In the Time Life book, Secrets of the Alchemists, it is stated that alchemy was among the first healing systems to emphasize that agents from outside sources could cause disease. In an engraving by astrologer and physician Robert Flood, the four winds are shown blowing against a patient's fortress of health, already invaded by pestilence in the broken turret at the upper left. The four winds and the archangels who directed them corresponded to the four elements and their relative phases in Hermetic work. Now bringing this back to our present times and in simple terms, how many have noticed or asked the question as to the energetic influence upon one's health of each and every morsel of food that is ingested, each chord that is heard, each article of clothing or precious stone worn, each shift in weather, each decoration hanging upon the walls, and each object held for various periods of time, and not singularly, but in union or in contrast with all other surrounding influences simultaneously. Furthermore, the position and imprint of the stars and luminaries in each moment. Factoring in these influences and our seeming lack of control over them, meditation is now more challenging to achieve than ever, as the widespread occurrence of that dreadful state known as attention deficit disorder has become all too commonplace, a condition of the masses. No longer do we sit in silence to savor our food, to absorb the nuances of our favorite song, to look up at the twinkling stars, or to contemplate the passage of time in a space of stillness, without a cell phone in hand, plugged into the cross currents of the artificial hive mind. As myriad occultists, alchemists, physicians, and philosophers have made note of through the centuries, we need to make use of each hour and each external influence appropriately for our desired outcomes, but most importantly, for self-mastery. This requires tremendous focus and discipline. As Julius Evola stated in his book, The Hermetic Tradition, life must be given over to the will, directed by one thought and served by the entire nature, to submit in every organ to the spirit, and by sympathy to all universal forces corresponding to them. All the faculties and sense must participate in the work. Nothing must be left inactive. He goes on to clarify that this entails a holistic approach to solving our problems, looking courageously to the whole of oneself, rather than the conditioned habit of seeking outside of the self for what we need. Then, that which we utilize from within the external world as tools for our advancement, and that which we further create serves us and our higher aims, rather than us becoming the slaves of our creation. Speaking of intentional creation, many of the world's most ancient architectural structures are adorned with alchemical symbols and highly intricate sacred geometry. researchers have theorized that the organs found in old churches were designed to effect positive changes in health, their various notes directly attuned to the body's internal organs. Many of the shapes found etched in stone, carved in glass, and shaped from granite contain the codes to our innate healing capacities. The human aura or energy field is depicted around many saints and deities in cultures worldwide, as well as the halo surrounding the head. Additionally, we find these shapes imprinted in various areas upon walls and windows in old world buildings. The aureole is a symbol of radiance, often shown surrounding the head of Christ. The mandorla, or almond-shaped aura, is usually shown around the body of Mother Mary. It is also known as a symbol of the womb and of birth. The nimbus takes the shape of a circle, triangle, square, or hexagon of light behind the head of sacred personages. Circling back to the Mysterium Conjunctionis, Carl Jung states, "The archetype of the self is exemplified in mandala symbolism, which portrays the self as a concentric structure, often in the form of squaring the circle. Coordinated with this are all kinds of secondary symbols, most of them expressing the nature of the opposites to be united. The structure is invariably felt as the representation of a central state or of a center of personality essentially different from the ego. It is of a numinous nature, as is clearly indicated by the mandalas themselves and by the symbols used, in parentheses, sun, star, light, fire, flower, precious stone, etc." This could be why the popular phrase, returning to center, is a reference to returning to homeostasis and well-being within ourselves, which ultimately means returning to the light of conscious awareness, which animates our very being. From the state of conscious awareness, rather than dull unconsciousness and hypnosis, we may direct our wills toward remembering ourselves as whole beings. We may incorporate outside tools to enhance or reflect this sense of wholeness as a sort of offering to that divine spark of consciousness from which we sprang. These external enhancements may be as solid and palpable as a carved gem, or as incorporeal as the reverberating sound of chimes and bells. Their effectiveness is increased with focused visualization. Alchemy has been directly linked with music in the past. Wave patterns have seemingly been fashioned onto the floors and walls of many old world churches. The German physician and alchemist Michael Meyer of the 17th century was also a composer whose music is believed to have been created to be sung under specific alchemical operations. The Baroque composer Claudio Monteverdi of that same century was a practicing alchemist who attempted to pursue the philosopher's stone, and he also channeled great currents of energy into his compositions. Long before Pink Floyd's laser light shows, the Russian composer and mystic Alexander Scriabin associated colors with musical keys. In his performance at Carnegie Hall in 1915, colored lights were projected against a screen in tandem with the music. The music itself was perceived as harsh and dissonant, and the experience as a whole was not well received by his audience, so it was not repeated. In his work, he attempted to merge sound, color, philosophy, and mysticism together in order to transcend material limitations. Recent experiments have shown that music and sound can alter our physical, emotional, and mental states. The alchemist is well aware of this fact and uses it to his or her advantage. There exist many different alchemical procedures that incorporate rituals such as chanting, as well as objects found in nature according to planetary alignments. The application of plant medicine is an aspect of alchemy that has persisted more so than many of the others. The plants were linked with specific celestial lights and constellations and administered on specific days, at specific hours. Arriving at the knowledge of herbs and their usage was often by way of the doctrine of signatures, which states that many herbs, fruits, and vegetables have physical traits and patterns that mirror the ailment that they can treat. Paracelsus considered the doctrine of signatures to be a principal foundation upon which to analyze the properties of herbs. Examples of these signatures include the pointy leaves of rosemary resembling needles, which symbolize mental sharpness, as this herb is used to enhance memory and mental functions. Avocados resemble the womb and are known to be good for reproductive health, a helpful food during pregnancy. The bright red color of beets reveals its benefits for blood health. Later, the botanist William Coles from the 17th century stated that God showed men what plants were useful for in obvious ways. Whether through taste, sight, sound, smell, or touch, there is so much that we take in unconsciously through our senses in each moment, as well as through our subtle energy field, that just as our selective perception only allows a certain percentage of input at a time, we only process a collection of energy input, data, and experiences to the degree that we are capable of at any given time. The things that we witness or experience that cause us the most discomfort don't just disappear from our existence. We tend to push them into the darkness of our subconscious to be dealt with at a later time. The more we try to stifle and silence them, the more discomfort is caused in the body because we are using force to try to ignore that which demands acknowledgement and release. In addition, the energy that is spent on trying to suppress our disturbances hinders the signals that would be received by the higher mind in the form of intuition. This results in even greater distress on physical and emotional levels. The spiritual goal of alchemy is to gain mastery over our mind, not by force, but through discipline, whereby over time, the quality of our physical, emotional, and mental states have been purified and transmuted. Ultimately, this enables us to pass into the afterlife with less spiritual weight and a greater chance of liberation. The process of alchemizing our lives can be enriching and enjoyable as more and more each day we consciously decide what to remove or introduce into our energy fields, whether in physical actuality or through mental focus. These actions may be simple or elaborate, each yielding their own results. One might compare the difference in energy levels and overall productivity to the days when no mental discipline was applied. Essentially, the choice exists for us to live in default mode, allowing outside influences to dictate our experiences, or for us to consciously choose what to feed with our attention. In the early stages of deliberately choosing our focus, we are met with many challenges and various forms of resistance. However, our efforts pay off in the long run. The more conscious we become, the more healing is possible throughout the entirety of our being.